If you're looking to install some lockers in your mudroom for your family to use, keep watching this video because I will break down all of the components that I use to turn this ugly thing into this. Let's get right to it. The first thing that you want to do is make sure that you get all of your measurements taken and create a basic drawing, just something on a sheet of paper like this that gives you all of your measurements and lays it out the way that you're planning to install. This will help you nail down all of the cuts that you need to make so you're only going out and making cuts once. It will make your life a heck of a lot easier if you get this part right before you move forward. Now in our house, we were using these IKEA shelves for about 3 years. They created more of a problem than a benefit for us because it just became a parking area for all of the junk in the house. My solution was to come up with something that had less shelves so that we would pile less stuff on it and keep it a little bit more organized and neat. So step number one for us was to clear off these shelves and get them out of the room. I'll be using these shelves for another project in the future. Once you have the area cleared, you can also remove your baseboards. I always start this by scoring the top with my razor knife. This just creates a little bit of a gap between the top of the baseboard and the wall and eliminates that caulk so you can get through it. Now this is where the magic happens. And if you do not have one of these tools, make sure you pick up a Goldblatt trim remover. I love this tool to death. The top flat part of the tool is made for the hammer. This is where you knock it down inside behind the back of the baseboard. Once you get this behind the baseboard, you simply pull up and you'll see that these two parts separate. That pulls the baseboard away from the wall. Just work your way right down the wall and do this several times. The entire baseboard will come out so easy. The best part is, it doesn't really mark up your walls. And now for one of the longest parts of this entire job, cutting. I cut more plywood than I have cut in a really long time. All of the sides for the lockers, all of the tops and the bottoms for the lockers, the sides, the middles, the top, the bottom, for the base, the top, the entire thing. I cut all of my plywood at once so that all I would have to do is assemble it after the fact. I chose to use pocket hole screws to attach everything for this project. Now I've used a Kreg jig for years now, but I bought the Kreg 720 to make this job go faster, and this thing was lightning fast. I've never done pocket hole screws this fast. So my second step was to take all of the pieces that I cut and get my pocket holes drilled into every piece that required it. And to attach with those pocket holes, I'm using 1 1/4 inch Kreg pocket hole screws, and I went with 1 1/4 because I'm using 3/4 inch plywood. Now, like a dummy, when I started to assemble my base and gluing these pieces together, I was using an old Elmer's wood glue that I had laying around because I didn't have the glue that I needed just yet. Please don't do this. Buy the right glue from the start, and I highly recommend Titebond 2. These Titebond glues are fantastic. They work on all sorts of woods, and honestly, they're just way easier to work with. Now, taking a quick step back, one of the things that you also need to make sure you do is sand all of the pieces that are going to be visible. Here's what I mean. I purchased 3/4 inch maple sanded plywood. Now it's sanded, but it's not sanded perfectly. You want to make sure you have a very smooth surface before you put any paint, primer, or anything on this material. With everything sanded, now I can get to the assembly. I used clamps on every single corner to ensure my pieces were flush when I glued them and when I installed all of these pocket hole screws. For the lockers, I installed the tops and the bottoms first, and then I put 3 pieces in the back. One large one in the top because I'm going to be putting hooks in the backs of my lockers and I wanted a big area that I could screw into. I did one in the bottom, and I also put one in the middle. This is for stability, and then also if I need to attach anything in the future, but also for a little something extra special when I did the finishing on these lockers. We'll get there soon. One quick note about these pocket hole screws. After you drill and put the screws into them, you'll notice that there are holes left over, but Kreg was way ahead on this one. They created these pocket hole plugs that you can put in the holes. All you have to do is spread glue around the outside of them and put them in. Once they dry, you can either sand it down or trim it down and then sand it, and it looks perfect. Once you get all of your pieces assembled, please, please, please dry fit everything before you start to install a thing. Here's why. When I dry fit all of my pieces, I ran into a bit of a problem. I realized that my measurements, the planning at the beginning of this process, were off. And it was because of a bonehead mistake that I made in my math. When I did my measurements, for some reason I was thinking that I would be attaching my sides and my tops like this, my top going into my side. When I actually put the lockers together, my tops went into the top of my sides. What this basically means is that I immediately took 3/4 of an inch off of every side of every locker. At 1.5 inches per locker, 4 lockers, that was 6 inches short. I saw it immediately in the middle, and I saw it very clearly on the far end. Now, after I had a moment where I quite legitimately freaked out a little bit, my wife came up with a brilliant idea to turn this extra section into mail slots, something that we've actually wanted to put in this mudroom anyway. So on my base, I moved my centerpieces, I put one in place, made sure that it was in the right spot, and then I took my second piece and put it right up next to it and screwed from the other side of the first into it to keep it in place. I also added an extra piece down at the end for the end of the 4th locker. I didn't really get a good recording of it, but you can see it over here in this shot. That's gonna be a package slot right next to these shoe areas on this base piece. I also installed my shelves. Now that I know I have all of my vertical pieces in the right spot, I used spacers to ensure that both shelves would be installed at the exact same height on this base. So I did one more dry fit just to make sure everything was gonna go in appropriately, and then I moved on to my least favorite step. I primed all of these pieces. Now, I hate painting. I don't know if you've heard me say this before, but when it comes to painting, if I'm using a power tool, it makes it a little less painful. So I went out in the backyard and I sprayed primer on all of these pieces. I wanted to ensure that when they went in, it was going to be easier to paint them and it wouldn't be a real pain in the rear end to prime it all in place. Now I ended up cutting a hole out of this wall because I know there's a cinder block wall behind the drywall and it's just furring strips there. And I really wanted to make sure that I had the exact position of those strips nailed down. With that section out, I just used my level to mark where those strips are so I know where I need to insert my screws. I created a base for the bottom of my bottom portion of these lockers. It's constructed out of 2x4s and I left enough to have a 3-inch overhang right in the front of the lockers. The purpose of this was to ensure that when we all walked up to the lockers, our feet would not go right into the front of them. And the next piece is to get that 2x4 base in place. You need to make sure that you shim this appropriately. Just go buy a pack of shims at Lowe's or Home Depot, but shim this appropriately so that it is level. If this is not level, it will throw off the entire project. So take time with this step. Make sure you shim it properly. Once you confirm that it's level, you can now screw it into the studs in your wall. With all of this done, we can move on to the best part of the project, full installation. And for all of those details, click or tap on this video. Until the next time, keep doing it yourself.